There were 19 alternatives that eventually started in the planning study, and that was refined down to 8 alternatives. And these are the 8 alternatives, and I'll go through each one of them and show them to you. And these are what the purpose and needs and the goals and objectives will be judged against these alternatives. Well, the committee is not yet in the process of actually identifying alternatives. These will be the ones that they will start with, and they will ultimately probably narrow these down to between 4, maybe even as little as 3 alternatives, as well as the no-build alternative, and that's what will be assessed through the environmental assessment process. And that assessment will look at doing design work up to about 10% of the projects, or those numbers that are ultimately identified. The first project that was identified is called minor improvements within the existing right-of-way, and it's using the traffic pattern that now exists, and it straightens out some turns and curves so that you don't have as many connection problems with freight as you do originally. And just to help, the bridges are here, your couplet that comes across the Oak Washington Bridge, going up Stevens, and this would widen out and correct some curves at the Diamond Lake Stevens intersection, and then continue on out Diamond Lake. Really doesn't have any major changes or differences other than the widening of some right-of-way and straightening some curves. The second alternative is a alignment that shows a direct alignment using the Washington Street Bridge and becoming a two-way bridge that would come and connect directly to Diamond Lake. And the Oak Street Bridge would become a local roadway or some other fashion. Our understanding with this alternative is that there are a lot of details in here, like the elimination of the connections that had not been fully fleshed out. And so how far this will fare in the environmental process is unknown. The third alternative was the alignment of coming across Washington Bridge and using Rose Street. So you'd come further across, you'd connect to Rose Street, and then you'd connect back up to Diamond Lake Boulevard. The purpose of this was to make some of those curves less sharp and easier for freight. Obviously, since this alignment was identified, the city has built a new public safety center, and this also is likely to be one of the alternatives that may not make it through the process. The next one is a bridge that will come off at where the 2 bridges are now. It would go up across Elk Island, and it is intended to be a crossing that would end at the railroad tracks so that you would still have an at-grade crossing of the railroad tracks. So you'd still be crossing the railroad tracks as you are now. The second one, which is pretty much the same alignment, the difference is this is the railroad bridge coming over and across and above, so that you'd have a below railroad crossing. Now, the cost of these two are unknown, but projected to be pretty substantial. This alignment is coming across and going over the railroad tracks, and you would end up landing someplace way out here. And again, and then this also includes a couplet where you'd have traffic. You'd have to reroute traffic on a two-system couplet in order to make this work. Then we have the Diamond Lake Odell couplet, and you'd have this two-way couplet that you currently have now. It would continue, and then you'd have a second two-way couplet where you'd have eastbound traffic going out on Diamond Lake, and then westbound traffic coming up on Odell and going down Stevens. And then the last of the alternatives identified through the study is also a couplet, only this couplet includes the direct length with the bridge coming over and connecting up right at Diamond Lake and Stevens. So those are the 8 alternatives that have been identified through the planning study, and that's where the CAC will be starting, is with those 8 alternatives. So right now, what we're really asking, and really what John's asking, and I'm going to ask him to jump in here in a minute, is for you to give input to him on the goals and objectives once you've had a chance to look at those that we've provided in your packet. And if you have any comments about the alternatives, that you can share with him as they go on through the citizen advisory process.